Barbara Sullivan woke up before the sun, as she often did these days. The morning chill in her small, two-room apartment in the quiet outskirts of Maple Grove was sharp enough to make her shiver. She wrapped a faded pink cardigan over her shoulders and peered out the window. The sky was just beginning to lighten, streaks of pale gold splitting the horizon. Though Barbara was no stranger to early mornings, today felt different. She glanced at her grandson, Ethan, who was still asleep on the pull-out couch they shared. An affectionate smile tugged at her lips as she remembered why she had to leave so early. For months, money had been tight. Barbara relied on a modest pension from her late husband's work, supplemented by a small local senior stipend. Even with meticulous budgeting, each grocery trip had become a mental balancing act, deciding which items were truly necessary and which ones might be a luxury. With Ethan in her care since the tragic passing of her daughter, Alice Barbara had taken on the dual role of grandmother and guardian. She considered it her life's mission to provide for the 8-year-old boy, who looked so much like his mother it sometimes made Barbara's chest ache with both sorrow and love. In the bathroom, she carefully combed back her thinning gray hair and secured it in a neat bun. She studied her reflection. Her face was mapped with lines, worry lines, laughter lines, and the permanent creases of a life lived in both hardship and joy. Yet her eyes still carried a warm, gentle sparkle. She reminded herself that Ethan needed that warmth. No matter how dire things got, she refused to show him her despair. An hour later, Ethan stirred. He stretched his arms in that sleepy, innocent way children do. Barbara greeted him with a soft, "Good morning, sweetheart," and a cup of steaming oatmeal. They ate their humble breakfast side by side at a small wooden table. Barbara's mind drifted to the day's tasks paying the electricity bill, picking up Ethan's medication for his mild asthma, and, of course, shopping for groceries at Greenfield Market. Greenfield Market was a mid-sized store in Maple Grove's main shopping district. It was known for decent prices, friendly staff most of the time, and a wide variety of goods. Barbara liked it because it allowed her to compare prices carefully, something she had become adept at. She often clutched a handful of coupons and a small pouch of coins she meticulously counted each week to stay within her tight budget. But that particular morning, something else was on her mind: Ethan's upcoming birthday. The boy had never asked for much. Still, turning 9 was a milestone. Barbara wondered if she could somehow manage to buy him a small cake or maybe a new puzzle. He loved putting puzzles together, often passing hours immersed in assembling shapes that tested his young mind. After breakfast, Barbara carefully unzipped a worn leather pouch containing her weekly allowance. She spread the coins on the table and counted them twice, verifying she had enough for the essentials: bread, milk, rice, some vegetables if they were on sale, and maybe a small treat for Ethan. She also recalled that he had been eyeing a particular bag of chocolate candies the last time they were at the market, candies that reminded him of his mother's treat days. As they prepared to leave, Barbara felt a slight pang of worry. Did she have enough for everything? Perhaps she could skip 1 or 2 items to afford Ethan's candies. She shook off her anxiety somehow. She'd make it work. Barbara never wanted Ethan to feel deprived of simple joys. Walking hand in hand, they made their way to the bus stop. Maple Grove was bustling with early risers. Cars drove by, shops lifted their shutters, and street vendors began hawking their goods. Ethan's eyes were bright with curiosity, as they always were. He marveled at everything from the pigeons pecking at crumbs to the hand-painted sign advertising fresh produce. Despite the seriousness of their situation, his innocence made each day feel a bit lighter. When they arrived at Greenfield Market, the automatic doors whooshed open. A rush of cool, air-conditioned air greeted them. Ethan giggled, stepping in with excitement. He loved the colors, the displays, and the occasional free sample stands that dotted the aisles. Barbara could sense his delight. She knew that even a mundane trip to buy groceries could be an adventure in the eyes of a child. They weaved through the produce section, selecting only the freshest and cheapest vegetables. Barbara meticulously compared prices, sometimes walking back and forth between aisles to double-check. It was an effort, but worth it when every cent counted. Ethan strolled alongside, gently touching the fruits, inhaling the smell of ripe oranges, and occasionally trying to guess the weight of random items. The store was somewhat busy that morning. People shuffled about, filling carts with goods. Some chatted with acquaintances they bumped into, while others were in a hurry, checking off items on a list. Barbara noticed a new sale sign: discount on bread buy 1, get 1 half off. Her heart lifted. That meant she could stock up on an extra loaf for fewer coins, a small victory in the day's financial juggling. At the corner of the bakery section, Ethan's eyes lit up at the sight of small decorated cupcakes. Barbara felt a pang in her heart. She approached them hesitantly. Each was frosted in pastel colors with sprinkles on top. One in particular was shaped like a miniature basketball, ironically reminiscent of the actual logo worn by none other than Michael Jordan. Ethan gazed at it and Barbara hesitated. The price was somewhat steep for a single cupcake, but seeing Ethan's hopeful expression pained her. She made a mental note that maybe, if she skipped something else, she could buy it. "Grandma," Ethan began, his voice trembling with excitement. "Look at that one. It looks like a real basketball." He pointed to the bright orange treat with wide eyes. Barbara smiled softly. She told him they'd see how many coins were left after they bought the essentials, but there was a chance they could afford one. He nodded understandingly, always trying to be the good boy who didn't burden his grandmother. They continued through the store, placing milk, rice, and a few canned goods into their modest cart. Ethan happily offered to push it, though the cart's broken wheel occasionally squeaked, leading to comedic zigzags down the aisle. Barbara gently guided him, cautious not to bump into anyone. As they passed the candy aisle, she saw the small bag of chocolate candies that Ethan adored. It had a picture of a cartoon character on it, something he watched on TV whenever they got the chance. She added it to the cart, mentally calculating how much money remained. The coins in her pouch jingled like an ominous reminder of her budget constraints. Finally, after weaving through the store for nearly an hour, Barbara decided they had everything they needed. Bread, milk, some fresh vegetables, rice, a small box of tea for her arthritic joints. She believed a warm cup helped ease the pain, and Ethan's chocolate candies. She glanced at the cupcake section one last time but walked past it, deciding to remain practical. Ethan pretended not to mind, but she saw his fleeting disappointment. Unbeknownst to them, a tall figure in a hooded jacket was also navigating the aisles, none other than Michael Jordan. He had come to Maple Grove for a low-profile charitable event at a nearby youth center, always one to avoid unnecessary attention. He had chosen Greenfield Market early in the morning, assuming fewer fans would be around. While he mostly kept to himself, he was the type who noticed people, especially those who seemed to be struggling. As a sports icon, Jordan had long championed community support, but that day, he had no idea he was about to be drawn into a moment that would test everyone's compassion. Barbara and Ethan made their way to the checkout lanes. Most lanes were moderately busy except for one near the end, manned by a young cashier named Russell. He had only been at Greenfield Market for a few months, and though he had started out polite, there had been complaints from customers recently about his impatience. But Barbara, more focused on finishing her errands, didn't know any of that. At first glance, Russell seemed preoccupied. He looked up briefly to see who was next in line, then turned back to the register with a sigh. A sense of tension hung in the air around him, like a static charge before a storm. Barbara gently placed her items on the conveyor belt, making sure everything was lined up neatly. Ethan stood beside his grandmother, holding the bag of chocolate candies protectively. It was the one item he most looked forward to. Barbara smiled softly, whispering, "We'll see if we have enough, dear. If not, we might have to leave something." Ethan nodded, though a slight shadow of worry crossed his face. Russell scanned the items with a bored expression. "Is that all for you?" he asked, not bothering to look at them properly. Barbara nodded. The total popped up on the small screen. She reached into her pouch and began to place coins on the counter, carefully counting under her breath. 10, 15, 20. That was when Russell heaved a dramatic sigh and rolled his eyes. "You're paying in coins, really? This is going to take forever," he muttered, loud enough for the customers behind them to hear. A low murmur spread through the line. Barbara felt a flush of embarrassment creep across her cheeks. She attempted to speed up her counting, but her fingers shook slightly. Ethan glanced nervously between his grandmother and Russell, sensing the tension but not fully grasping why the cashier was so annoyed. Another customer behind them, a middle-aged woman with impatience etched on her face, tapped her foot. "Some of us have places to be," she murmured, although not directly addressing Barbara. The comment still reached Barbara's ears and made her cringe inwardly. Russell seized the opportunity to vent. "Exactly. If she'd counted her coins at home first, maybe we wouldn't be stuck here," he said, a sneer coloring his voice. He bagged the groceries abruptly, the plastic crinkling sharply under his frustrated hands. At that moment, another man quietly joined the line behind them, wearing a hooded jacket and dark sunglasses. To Russell, he was just another customer, no big deal. But the man was. In fact, Michael Jordan. Jordan observed the scene with calm detachment, though an undercurrent of disapproval sparked in his eyes. He had seen more than enough everyday cruelty in his travels. Something in the way Barbara trembled reminded him of countless fans he had encountered, people with quiet dignity, just trying to get by. Barbara's face was burning now. She glanced nervously at Ethan, worried the boy would feel ashamed. She spoke in a soft, apologetic tone. "I'm sorry. I'm almost done." As she neared the total, she realized she was short. Her heart clenched. She quickly weighed her options. The bread and milk were non-negotiable. The vegetables were essential too. After a deep breath, she gently took the bag of chocolate candies from Ethan's hands, returning it to the side. "We will leave this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan looked crestfallen, but he forced a smile. "It's okay, Grandma. I didn't really need it," he said, though his disappointment was palpable. Russell smirked. "At least now we can speed this up," he muttered. The woman behind them exhaled in exasperation, half rolling her eyes as if she couldn't stand another second of the situation. Barbara continued counting her remaining coins. The total was just enough without the candies. She sighed with a mixture of relief and heartbreak. Placing the final coin on the counter, she tried to ignore the stinging humiliation, reminding herself that her only priority was to get Ethan home with some food. Suddenly, a calm but firm voice spoke up from behind. "Are we in that big of a hurry that we can show a little compassion?" Everyone in line turned to see who had spoken. There stood Michael Jordan, slowly lowering his hood and removing his sunglasses. His gaze flicked from Russell to the impatient customers behind Barbara. A silence fell over the checkout area. The few people who recognized him immediately reacted with a mix of astonishment and excitement. One whispered, "Oh my goodness, that's Michael Jordan," to a friend standing next to them. But even those who didn't follow basketball could sense the authority in his voice and the calm confidence in his posture. Russell blinked, clearly taken aback, but quickly tried to play it off. We were just trying to keep the line moving," he said, eyes shifting nervously. He must have recognized who he was talking to, or at least realized that this was someone with presence and influence. Jordan stepped forward. Even though he wasn't in his official capacity as an athlete or celebrity, there was an undeniable charisma about him. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a wallet. "Let me cover whatever's left for them," he said, turning to Barbara with a kind smile. No grandmother should have to put back something for her grandson just because of a little shortfall. Barbara's eyes widened. She opened her mouth to protest, her pride warring with her gratitude. It's okay, sir. We'll manage," she stammered. But Jordan's expression was gentle yet insistent. "I want to take no for an answer," he said, placing a few bills on the counter. Then, with a wink at Ethan, he nodded at the bag of candies. "Don't to forget those." A hush fell over the store. Russell swallowed hard, unsure of how to proceed. Eventually, he scanned the candies again and processed the extra bills. As he handed back the change, his demeanor shifted from haughty to subdued. He murmured something that sounded like an apology, but it was half-formed and mumbled under his breath. The tension in the line dissolved, replaced by a palpable wave of relief and even admiration. The middle-aged woman behind them who had tapped her foot earlier looked noticeably embarrassed. Some of the other customers whispered among themselves, pointing out Michael Jordan. Others simply watched with softened expressions, moved by the unexpected act of kindness. Barbara, still shaking, carefully accepted the bag of candies and placed it back into her grocery bag. She turned to Michael Jordan, her voice quavering with emotion. "Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say," she managed. Jordan smiled warmly. "No need, just take care of each other," he replied, his gaze briefly shifting to Ethan's wide-eyed wonder. "You've got a great grandson there." Ethan clutched the edge of the shopping cart, eyes shining. He recognized Jordan from the sports highlights he sometimes caught on TV. Yet even if he hadn't, he would have understood that this was a man who cared enough to help a stranger. "Thank you," the boy whispered, his voice overflowing with gratitude. In that moment, you could almost feel the intangible ripple of empathy coursing through the small gathering. Customers who had been impatient moments earlier now looked at their own carts and seemed to reflect. The entire checkout lane seemed to slow down, as if everyone collectively remembered the importance of compassion, even in mundane errands like grocery shopping. Jordan stood with them for a moment longer. He said softly, "Sometimes, we all get wrapped up in our own busy lives, but we should never forget to show kindness." As if to emphasize his point, he glanced at Russell, who was still working the register with an abashed expression. The cashier bit his lip, unable to hide his internal conflict. Guilt flickered across his face as he realized he had contributed to an ugly situation that didn't need to happen. Barbara managed a soft laugh, albeit one tinged with lingering nerves. She and Ethan gathered their bags, now heavier by exactly one bag of chocolate candies, and began to step away. Before they fully left the line, Jordan leaned in and whispered something to Barbara. Her face lit with surprise, and tears welled in her eyes. She nodded, but said nothing in response, apparently too overwhelmed to speak. No one else knew what he had said to her at that moment, but it was clear it carried deep significance. As the two parted ways, the line resumed its normal pace only this time. A fresh wave of politeness seemed to prevail. Russell's once impatient attitude had cooled, his posture grew rigid and respectful. Even the woman who had tapped her foot offered Barbara a polite nod, as if acknowledging her own haste. That singular moment might have ended there, an uplifting anecdote to be remembered only by the small group who witnessed it. But fate had other plans. A young woman waiting behind them had discreetly recorded the incident with her phone. Within hours, the clip featuring an exasperated cashier, a humble grandmother, an endearing little boy, and a philanthropic sports legend would ignite social media. For now, though, Barbara and Ethan simply exited Greenfield Market, groceries in hand, hearts a little lighter thanks to the kindness they had received. Neither realized that this was only the beginning of a much larger chain of events that would touch countless lives across Maple Grove and beyond. They caught a bus back to their apartment, the plastic grocery bags rustling at their feet. As the bus rolled through the familiar streets, Ethan snuggled up beside Barbara, resting his head on her shoulder. She placed an arm around him, drawing him close. In that quiet moment, despite all the trials and tribulations they faced, Barbara felt a profound sense of hope. The thought briefly crossed her mind. Who was she? To have been helped by Michael Jordan, of all people. And what had he whispered in her ear that made her heart flutter with both excitement and trepidation? She glanced down at Ethan, who was fiddling happily with the bag of candies. Yes, they had been through so much, but maybe, just maybe, life had a few more blessings in store for them. Barbara and Ethan stepped off the bus into the cool air, grocery bags in hand. They walked the short distance to their apartment in Maple Grove, the morning's events replaying in Barbara's mind, the impatient cashier, her trembling hands counting coins, and Michael Jordan stepping in like a guardian angel. Even now, it felt unreal. Ethan hugged a small bag of chocolate candies, Jordan's gift, against his chest. He seemed lost in thought, and Barbara couldn't blame him. The weight of the morning clung to her heart. Once inside their modest apartment, she set the groceries on the tiny kitchen table. She inhaled a shaky breath, recalling the whisper Jordan had shared with her, a phone number for the Champions Foundation. Ethan broke the silence. "Grandma, what did Mr. Jordan say to you?" His voice was small. Barbara touched the slip of paper in her cardigan. "He gave me a number to call if we needed help. But we'll see, Ethan. We've managed so far, haven't we?" He nodded, though his eyes shone with curiosity. Barbara encouraged him to open the candy bag, hoping a sweet treat might restore some normalcy. Yet her own mind remained unsettled, haunted by the memory of Russell's sneering face and the audience that had witnessed her humiliation. Meanwhile, Maple Grove buzzed with the news. A customer at Greenfield Market had filmed the entire scene on her phone, uploading it to social media. Within hours, thousands of viewers had watched Barbara's struggle and Jordan's intervention. Commenters seethed at the cashier's treatment of an elderly woman, while praising Jordan's kindness. At the store, manager Bradley Monroe was in crisis mode. Outraged calls and emails poured in, demanding action. Corporate headquarters wanted answers. Bradley grimaced at his assistant, Linda. "We can't ignore this. That cashier was out of line," Linda sighed. "Yes, sir. People keep asking about the grandmother. They want to help her, but we don't know who she is." Bradley rubbed his temples. "Start checking receipts, ask employees. Someone must recognize her." But Barbara had paid in coins. No digital trail existed. In the stockroom, Russell paced in a daze. He'd seen the video. He was now a pariah on local social media. Guilt gnawed at him. He remembered the flicker of hurt in Barbara's eyes and Ethan's silent fear. He knew he'd crossed a line, and the repercussions were piling up like boxes in the store's back room. He braced for the disciplinary meeting with Bradley later in the day, unsure if he'd have a job by evening. That afternoon, a knock sounded at Barbara's door. A woman introduced herself as Nancy Bates, a reporter from the Maple Grove Chronicle. She politely asked to speak with Barbara about the incident. Although Barbara wished for privacy, she allowed Nancy inside, unsettled by how quickly word had spread. Nancy flipped open a small notebook. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Sullivan. People online are calling your experience proof of everyday cruelty and everyday heroism. Could you share how you feel? Barbara fiddled with her hands. I'm not sure about heroism. I was just short on money. Michael Jordan decided to help. And I'm grateful. I wish the cashier had treated me with a bit more patience. But I don't want him fired. Nancy looked intrigued. How do you feel about the sudden attention? Hundreds of people are offering donations, and many want to see the cashier punished. Barbara sighed, her voice trembling. I never asked for any of this. I am embarrassed by how it all happened. But I also don't believe in ruining someone's life over a bad day. I'd rather people focus on kindness. The reporter thanked her for her perspective and left. Barbara's shoulders slumped. She caught Ethan's worried gaze from across the room and offered him a reassuring nod. Later, Russell faced his own reckoning in Bradley's office. The manager's tone was icy. That video put us under a microscope. Russell, we have to take action. You are suspended without pay for 2 weeks. You will complete sensitivity training or lose your job. Russell swallowed hard, relief mixing with shame. I understand. I'm sorry. I let my stress get the better of me. Bradley nodded curtly. If we ever identify the woman, you will apologize to her face too. Russell could only nod, mind churning over how he might find Barbara and make amends. That evening, Barbara sat in her cramped living room, a single lamp illuminating the walls. She stared at the slip of paper bearing the Champions Foundation's phone number. Jordan's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes accepting help is the bravest thing you can do. She felt torn between pride and a desire to give Ethan a better life. Ethan, busy assembling a puzzle on the floor, noticed her troubled expression. Grandma, are you okay? He asked softly. She forced a smile. Yes, sweetheart. Just thinking. Summoning courage. She picked up the telephone and dialed. After a few rings, a cheerful voice answered. Champions Foundation. How may I help you? Barbara cleared her throat. My name is Barbara Sullivan. Michael Jordan told me to call. He mentioned something about scholarships for my grandson. The representative sounded pleased. We'd be happy to arrange a meeting. Ms. Sullivan, we provide assistance for families, everything from educational programs to emergency funding. Mr. Jordan called ahead and asked us to be on the lookout for you. Barbara's heart fluttered. She set an appointment for later that week. Hanging up, she felt both excitement and dread. Could she handle this sudden spotlight? Her main focus was Ethan, whose future now seemed brighter. Meanwhile, Michael Jordan checked his phone between charity appearances. A message from the Champions Foundation confirmed Barbara's call. He smiled, relieved she was open to their support. Despite the viral uproar, he believed the real story was Barbara's resilience. The next day, Nancy Bates's article hit the Maple Grove Chronicle's front page, featuring Barbara's gentle refusal to condemn Russell. Readers flooded the paper's website with comments offering admiration for Barbara's forgiveness. Some criticized the cashier more fiercely, but many simply wanted to help Barbara and Ethan in tangible ways. Barbara, lacking an internet connection, learned of the article from her neighbor, Mrs. Garrison, who discreetly passed along a copy. Barbara read it with mixed feelings. The coverage praised her humility, yet revealed painful details of her struggles. She closed the newspaper, feeling as though her life had become public property overnight. Ethan, however, was thrilled by glimpses of the story. You're famous, Grandma, he teased. Barbara couldn't help but laugh, ruffling his hair. Fame wasn't something she'd ever wanted, but it seemed to have found her anyway. On the day of her meeting with the Champions Foundation, Barbara dressed in her cleanest blouse and worn gray skirt. She and Ethan took a bus to the community center. Inside a modest conference room, they were greeted by two friendly staff members, Jennifer and Ramon. To Barbara's surprise, Michael Jordan himself appeared a few minutes later, slipping in quietly to observe. Jennifer explained the foundation's mission, connecting families to resources like tutoring, after-school programs, and scholarships. Ramon described how they could assist with groceries or rent if needed. Barbara listened, her pulse racing. She never imagined such opportunities existed for her grandson. Jordan offered her a warm smile. We just want to help you. Barbara, you've done so much for Ethan already. Tears prickled at her eyes. I don't know how to thank you. It's overwhelming. Ethan sat quietly beside her, wide-eyed at the possibility of basketball clinics or even advanced lessons if he wanted to pursue sports. They wrapped up the meeting with plans for a follow-up. Barbara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She clutched a folder full of information about educational programs and financial aid, her mind spinning with new hopes. Jordan shook her hand gently. "We'll be here for you. Just let us know what you need." When they returned home, Barbara prepared a simple dinner of tomato soup and toast, sharing some of the news with Ethan. He grinned ear to ear at the thought of specialized tutoring or even summer camp. For a brief moment, the harsh memory of counting coins at the supermarket faded, replaced by optimism. Nightfall found Russell wandering the sidewalks near Barbara S. building. After hearing rumors of her general location, he was determined to find her and apologize properly. His suspension gave him ample time to reflect on his behavior. He carried a small bouquet of wildflowers, cheap but heartfelt. He reached a door that matched the descriptions he'd heard, heart pounding. With a shaky hand, he knocked. Barbara answered, surprise flickering across her face when she recognized him. She stiffened, recalling his cruelty at the market. "Mom," Russell began, voice quavering, "I am so sorry. I was out of line. I don't want to excuse it. I just need you to know I regret everything I said." He thrust the flowers toward her. Barbara hesitated, then accepted them with a polite nod. "Thank you for coming. Please, come inside," she offered quietly. Russell stepped in, noticing the worn furniture and pictures of a younger Ethan on the walls. Ethan peered around the corner, eyes wide. Russell met his gaze with an apologetic smile. "I am sorry, kiddo. I was mean to your grandma." He turned back to Barbara. "I am on suspension, and I honestly don't blame them. But if there is anything I can do to make it up to you, anything at all, I want to try." Barbara studied him, sensing genuine remorse. She recalled her own words in the newspaper, how she didn't want to see him fired. "We all have bad days," she said softly. "But that doesn't excuse everything, does it?" Russell shook his head. "No, it doesn't." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small gift card to Greenfield Market. "I know it's not much, but maybe it'll help with groceries. Consider it a start toward an apology." Barbara hesitated but accepted the gift card. Her pride prickled, yet she recognized it as his sincere attempt to make amends. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. Ethan crept closer, curiosity overriding caution. "Are you still mad at him?" "Grandma," the boy's gaze flitted between them. Barbara set the flowers on the table. "No, dear, I'm not mad. Mistakes happen, but he's trying to fix this. That's important." Russell exhaled, relief flooding his face. After a moment's awkward pause, he turned to leave. "If you ever need anything, let me know," he offered, voice trembling with remorse. "And good luck with everything." When he was gone, Ethan looked at Barbara. "You really forgave him," he said, half in wonder. She nodded, brushing a thumb over the petals of the wildflowers. "I believe people can change if they want to, sweetheart." That night, after Ethan fell asleep, Barbara spent hours reading the brochures from the Champions Foundation. She flipped through scholarship details, after-school programs, even potential job training for herself. Though the swirl of public attention still frightened her, she saw a path leading toward a brighter horizon. Across town, Jordan reflected on the meeting with satisfaction. He had sensed Barbara S.'s sincerity and Ethan S.'s eagerness. The foundation staff had texted him a positive report. Barbara seems open to the support. Grateful but humble. Ethan is a bright kid. Jordan knew not everyone in need was willing to accept help, especially if it felt like charity. But he admired Barbara's willingness to do whatever she must for her grandson. At the Maple Grove Chronicle office, Nancy Bates was already drafting a follow-up piece. She wanted to highlight the outpouring of support from the community and Barbara's gracious stance on the cashier's punishment. Deep down, Nancy felt this story reflected something bigger, how a single spark of kindness could ripple across a town, changing not just one life but many. Russell, back in his small apartment, lay on his couch, staring at the ceiling. A swirl of emotions, regret, relief, uncertainty kept him awake. Apologizing to Barbara felt like a burden lifted. Yet he still faced 2 weeks without pay. His finances were precarious, and an apology wouldn't magically fix that. But he clung to a shred of hope that he could learn from this experience. Maybe, just maybe, he could reorient his life. By sunrise, Maple Grove had settled into a collective sense that something extraordinary was happening, all triggered by a single moment at a checkout lane. Neighbors who barely spoke now discussed Barbara S.'s story, wondering if they too could help. Social media brimmed with messages of sympathy and offers of assistance. Even the grocery store's reputation was shifting. Customers demanded better service standards, more empathy from staff. Barbara woke early, as she always did, to fix breakfast for Ethan. The smell of frying eggs filled the apartment. A sense of possibility mingled with the familiar pang of caution. Nothing in her life had been handed to her without effort, and she suspected the road ahead would still have bumps. But as Ethan trotted to the kitchen, hair mussed from sleep, Barbara felt a renewed purpose. They ate together, discussing school projects and the upcoming foundation programs. Ethan beamed when Barbara mentioned possible weekend sports clinics. "You think I could really learn basketball from people Mr. Jordan knows?" he asked, eyes shining. Barbara reached over and squeezed his hand. "If that's what you want." "I believe so," she said softly. She thought of her promise to Alice, Ethan's late mother, to give him the best life she could manage. For the first time in years, she felt she wasn't alone in keeping that promise. Through an open window, a gentle breeze drifted in, carrying faint street noises and the distant hum of passing cars. Outside, life carried on, commuters rushing to work, parents hustling children to school, shopkeepers flipping signs from closed to open. Yet in the Sullivan household, a quiet transformation was underway, built on a moment of kindness that had grown into a chorus of compassion. Barbara set down her fork, smiling at Ethan's enthusiasm. Soon she'd be off to follow up with the Champions Foundation, possibly to arrange tutoring sessions or to finalize details for a small stipend. She'd also consider how to handle the sudden influx of strangers wanting to help money, groceries, even job offers. At heart, she remained humble, uncertain of how much to accept. But she was resolved to move forward for Ethan's sake. The day stretched ahead, full of appointments and new connections. Another reporter had left a message, wanting Barbara's perspective for a regional news story. She still hadn't decided if she'd grant more interviews. Public attention was a double-edged sword. But if it helped Ethan flourish, maybe that was worth the cost. In the midst of the uncertainty, Barbara reminded herself of one unwavering truth: she and Ethan had each other. That foundation alone was enough to sustain them through lean years and heartbreak. Now, though, they had a broader support network: Michael Jordan, a philanthropic foundation, even the contrite cashier trying to atone. It was a tapestry of hope woven from unexpected threads. As Barbara placed dishes in the sink, she reflected on how a simple grocery run had changed everything. She knew life would never be quite the same. But that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. The future beckoned with its challenges and opportunities, and for the first time in a long while, she could meet it with cautious optimism. Tucking the slip of paper safely away, she prepared to step forward into a world that, despite its flaws, still had room for compassion and second chances. Just before Barbara and Ethan stepped out to catch the bus for her follow-up appointment with the foundation, the phone rang. It was Mrs. Garrison, her kind neighbor, urging Barbara to check the local news again. Another piece had just aired, featuring interviews with store patrons who praised Barbara's dignified response. The segment ended with a clip of Michael Jordan speaking at a youth charity event, expressing hope that generosity would become contagious. Barbara listened, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. She gently thanked Mrs. Garrison and replaced the receiver, turning to Ethan with a soft laugh. "I never imagined our errand would cause so much commotion," she said. Ethan, smiling, took her hand. "Grandma, maybe sometimes the biggest changes start from little moments." As they walked out the door, Barbara silently agreed, feeling both humble and inspired. A thought occurred to her. Perhaps the true lesson here was that simple acts of kindness held extraordinary power. She recalled the crushing embarrassment of counting out coins at the checkout, the sting of judgment in Russell's voice. Then she remembered Michael Jordan's gentle reassurance, the neighbors offering their support, and even Russell returning with remorse. Each gesture, big or small, had stitched itself into the tapestry of her life, transforming humiliation into hope. As the bus rumbled toward the next chapter of their journey, Barbara felt a sense of quiet determination. No matter how uncertain the road ahead, she and Ethan would face it together, buoyed by a community's compassion and the promise of new beginnings. Barbara Sullivan woke before dawn with a feeling of anticipation thrumming in her veins. Something about this day felt pivotal, as if she were standing on the threshold of a new chapter. She rose quietly from her bed so as not to wake Ethan, who was sound asleep in the pull-out couch in the main room, and padded into the tiny kitchen. Before anything else, she needed her morning tea to steady her nerves. Though the sun had yet to rise, Maple Grove was beginning to stir. Through the kitchen window, Barbara could see an occasional car pass by, headlights illuminating the modest street. Despite the early hour, her mind was already racing. She and Ethan had a busy day ahead. starting with a second appointment at the Champions Foundation. They would finalize some details about Ethan's tutoring and possibly explore additional help for Barbara. Her stomach fluttered at the thought of taking such a big leap. Sipping her tea, she reflected on how much had changed since that fateful trip to Greenfield Market. Michael Jordan's intervention had been like a stone tossed into still water, creating ripples that touched every corner of her life. Now, she was receiving calls and letters from strangers across the state and beyond, some offering kind words, others resources or donations. The notoriety made her uncomfortable, but the hope it brought for Ethan's future felt undeniable. She couldn't help smiling at the memory of her last phone call with the Foundation's representative, Jennifer. Jennifer had sounded so thrilled about Ethan's potential, even mentioning specialized puzzle clubs or academic clubs if that was what truly excited him. The idea that her grandson might have options beyond the local public school was both exhilarating and daunting. After finishing her tea, Barbara quietly got dressed in a neat skirt and blouse. She ran a comb through her silver hair, twisted it into a low bun, then gently woke Ethan. He yawned and blinked, stretching as he sat up on the couch. "Morning, Grandma," he mumbled. She ruffled his messy hair with a smile. "We've got a big day, sweetheart. Get dressed. And we'll have breakfast before we head out." Ethan nodded sleepily, but brightened almost instantly as he remembered the upcoming meeting at the Champions Foundation. "Are we going to see Mr. Jordan again?" he asked, eyes wide. Barbara gave a little shrug. "I'm not sure, dear. He might be busy, but you never know." A part of her hoped Jordan would be there. His gentle warmth and famous grin had a way of making everything feel possible. Even if he couldn't attend, she felt grateful for the help his foundation was providing. A new kind of morning. They ate a simple breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast, packing up small notebooks, pens, and any paperwork they thought they might need. Just as they were about to leave, the phone rang. Barbara hesitated, worried it might be another reporter. She set down her purse and picked up the receiver. "Good morning, Mrs. Sullivan," came a cheerful voice. "This is Evelyn Turner, the manager of our local TV station, WGRO. I hope I'm not catching you too early." Barbara's heart skipped. "Oh, good morning. How can I help you?" She tried to keep her voice steady. Evelyn's tone conveyed warmth and excitement. "We'd love to feature you in a special segment about community kindness. It would be a short interview, maybe 5 minutes, talking about your experience at Greenfield Market and how your life has changed since." Barbara felt her stomach clench. The idea of being on television made her uneasy. She glanced at Ethan, who was lacing up his shoes by the door, blissfully unaware of the conversation. Barbara hesitated. I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that." Evelyn responded gently. "I understand. It can be nerve-wracking. But your story has really resonated with people, and we'd love to shine a light on how everyday folks can come together to support one another. If you change your mind, here's my number." She rattled off the digits, which Barbara jotted on a scrap of paper. After a polite goodbye, Barbara hung up. She stared at the note for a moment, then folded it into her purse. She didn't want to let the attention spiral out of control, especially when she was just starting to find her footing. Still, she couldn't deny that public goodwill might open even more doors for Ethan. She pushed the thought from her mind for now, focusing on their imminent meeting with Jennifer and the staff at the Champions Foundation. "Ready, honey?" she asked Ethan, who nodded eagerly. The Foundation's warm welcome. They caught the same bus they'd had taken for the first meeting. The driver recognized them, offering a friendly nod, evidence that even in a busy town, repeated faces became familiar. Barbara settled into a seat, gazing out the window as they passed Maple Grove's modest downtown area. The old movie theater, the local library, and a few family-run shops flickered by. The sight reminded her of how little she'd ventured beyond her usual routines of grocery shopping, pharmacy visits, and penny pinching. Perhaps the Foundation's help would allow for a broader view of life. Ethan pressed his nose to the glass, pointing excitedly at a new billboard advertising a basketball clinic. "Grandma, look at that. Think I could join something like that one day?" he asked, his voice brimming with hope. Barbara patted his shoulder. "Let's see what Miss Jennifer says," she replied softly. The community center soon came into view. Barbara led Ethan inside, and they wound through the corridors until they reached a cheerful waiting area lined with posters of children smiling, playing sports, and working on art projects. A woman with kind eyes sat at a reception desk. "Good morning, Ms. Sullivan, Ethan," she said brightly. "Jennifer is expecting you. You can head on back to the same room as last time." They passed down a short hallway and found Jennifer waiting in the conference room with another staff member, a tall man named Maurice, who wore a crisp polo shirt sporting the Champions Foundation S logo. Jennifer rose to greet them, her face alight with warmth. "Welcome back. It's so good to see you both. How are you?" Barbara and Ethan exchanged a glance. "We're well, thank you," Barbara said, feeling a strange surge of gratitude for being treated so kindly. Maurice offered them each a seat. "I've heard great things about Ethan," he said, nodding toward the boy. "Jennifer tells me he loves puzzles. Is that right?" Ethan grinned shyly. "Yes, sir. I've been doing puzzles since I was really little. My mom got me hooked on them before she passed away." Maurice's gaze softened. "I'm sorry for your loss, Ethan. But that's amazing that you kept up the hobby." The foundation sponsors an academic explorers club where kids can try all sorts of challenges, brain teasers, robotics kits, coding activities. If that is something you'd be interested in, we'd be thrilled to enroll you. Ethan's face lit up. "Really? That sounds awesome." Barbara felt her heart swell. "That's wonderful," she murmured, already imagining Ethan's joy and the possibilities it could bring. Jennifer gestured to a folder in front of her. "We've also drafted a plan for some additional support, just to make sure you re-stable while Ethan explores these programs. For instance, we can help cover some of your monthly groceries or a portion of your rent if needed. No pressure, but we want you to feel comfortable." A flush of mixed emotion crept across Barbara's cheeks. She remembered how humiliating it felt to be unable to buy a simple bag of candy for Ethan. Now, an entire organization was offering to support them. She swallowed hard. "That's incredibly generous. I'd be lying if I said we didn't need it. But I also don't want to be a burden." Maurice offered a reassuring smile. "It's no burden. That's what the Champions Foundation does. We champion families who are in transitional phases. You've already shown such strength raising Ethan on your own. Think of this as a stepping stone toward an even better future." Barbara blinked back tears. "Thank you. Truly." They spent the next hour discussing logistics, how the funds would be dispersed, schedules for Ethan's academic club meetings, and even some potential for him to try out a sports clinic. Barbara felt as though she were standing in a bright new world. Once they had signed preliminary paperwork and scheduled the first round of tutoring sessions, Jennifer and Maurice escorted them out of the conference room. As they walked through the Center S lobby, Ethan paused, his eyes drifting toward a large poster featuring Michael Jordan's photo from a past charity basketball event. He whispered, "I hope we get to see him again and say thank you." Barbara patted his shoulder. "We will if we can, sweetheart." Jennifer, overhearing, added, "Actually, Mr. Jordan sometimes drops by for surprise visits. He likes to stay low-key, but if you're around on the right day, you just might bump into him." Ethan's grin stretched ear to ear, and Barbara couldn't help but feel that same spark of excitement. Russell's new path. While Barbara and Ethan navigated new opportunities, Russell was on a parallel journey. His 2-week suspension had given him ample time to reflect and, frankly, to worry about his finances. But instead of sinking into despair, he'd taken a proactive approach. He signed up for an online empathy and customer service course, determined to pass the sensitivity training demanded by Greenfield Markets Management. To his surprise, the course's materials were enlightening. Role-playing exercises, reading stories of people under financial strain, and exploring the impact of genuine kindness on customer experiences, it all made him realize how limited his own perspective had been. One afternoon, as he was halfway through a module titled Understanding the Customer's Journey, his phone buzzed. The store manager, Bradley Monroe, was calling. Russell's chest tightened. Was he about to be fired after all? He took a breath and answered. "Hello? Russell, it's Bradley," came the measured reply. "Listen, I've been reviewing your training progress. I see you've already completed half the course in less than a week." "That's good." Relief trickled through Russell's veins. "Thank you, sir. I'm trying my best." Bradley continued. "Corporate wants me to check in. We're hoping you will come in tomorrow for a meeting. We'd like you to do a short video apology for our social media channels, something to show you regret the incident and that the store is committed to improving. Does that sound workable?" A knot of anxiety coiled in Russell's gut. The idea of publicly apologizing, on camera no less, made him cringe. Still, he owed Barbara that much at least. "Yes, I'll do it," he said, keeping his voice steady. "Great. See you at 10 a.m., Bradley concluded. As he ended the call, Russell exhaled shakily. He remembered Barbara's forgiving nature and the vow he'd made to himself to change. This video apology would be another step in that direction. Though it frightened him, He sensed it was the right move. The call from WGRO. Later that evening, Barbara was tidying up their small living room. Ethan was hunched over a puzzle on the coffee table, a complicated cityscape with tiny pieces that were all varying shades of blue. She marveled at his patience, though it was another reminder of the calm focus he'd inherited from his mother. Just as Barbara folded a blanket, the phone rang again. She braced herself, suspecting another media request. To her surprise, the name on the line was familiar Evelyn Turner from WGRO, the local TV station manager who had called earlier that morning. "Ms. Sullivan, I'm so glad I caught you," Evelyn began. "I apologize if I am being persistent. We really believe your story would inspire our viewers. We'd just like you and Ethan to come by the studio for a live segment tomorrow afternoon, nothing too long or intrusive." Barbara's eyes flicked to Ethan, who was still absorbed in the puzzle. Her gut reaction was to decline. Yet she also remembered how kindly people had responded in letters and messages. Perhaps sharing her story might encourage others to show the same compassion. Maybe it would help people see that behind every person counting coins at a checkout is a life, a family, a story. She cleared her throat. "Could I bring Ethan along, if he's comfortable with it?" "Absolutely," Evelyn affirmed. "We'd love to meet him too." Barbara exhaled. "All right, we'll come. But please, let's keep it simple. I don't want to invade Ethan's privacy too much." "Understood. Thank you, Ms. Sullivan." "We'll see you at 2 p.m., Evelyn said, a smile evident in her voice. When Barbara hung up, she felt as though she'd just jumped off a ledge. Television, this was far outside her comfort zone. But the tide was carrying them along, and maybe sharing a bit of their journey could bring more good than harm. She walked over to Ethan, kneeling by the puzzle. "Sweetheart, how would you feel about going on TV with me tomorrow?" Ethan's hands stilled. He looked up, surprise bright in his eyes. "Really? Like live TV?" She nodded. "Yes, a local station wants to talk to us about everything that's happened. Only if you are comfortable." A grin tugged at his lips, though Barbara saw a flicker of anxiety. I guess so. That sounds kinda cool, maybe scary too." Barbara smiled, rubbing his back gently. "We'll do it together. It might be a little scary, but I think we can handle it." He nodded, returning to his puzzle with fresh excitement. Barbara rose, feeling a mixture of pride and nerves. Tomorrow would be another turning point, one she could never have predicted a mere week ago. Russell's public apology. The next morning found Russell standing in a small back office at Greenfield Market, the same place where he'd been reprimanded. A camera was set up on a tripod, handled by a young marketing intern. Manager Bradley hovered to the side, arms folded. Linda, the assistant manager, stood nearby with a folded piece of paper, likely bullet points for Russell S.'s statement. Russell S.'s palms sweated. He glanced at the camera lens, feeling as though it were a judge glaring at him. Linda offered him the paper. "Here's a draft if you need help. But we want you to speak in your own words if possible." He read the bullet points, acknowledged the incident, apologized to Barbara Sullivan, her grandson, and the community, expressed commitment to improving and providing better service. Russell gave a small nod. "I'll try," he said quietly, handing back the paper. Linda stepped aside, and the intern counted down from 3. The camera's red light flicked on, and Russell inhaled. "Hello, my name is Russell, and I am the cashier from Greenfield Market involved in the recent incident with Mrs. Sullivan and her grandson. I want to say, from the bottom of my heart, I'm sorry." He paused, swallowing hard. Images of Barbara's trembling hands and Ethan's worried gaze swam before his eyes. "I was impatient and rude, and there's no excuse for that. Mrs. Sullivan deserved kindness and respect, just like any customer does. I regret the pain I caused, and I'm grateful she forgave me. I also want to apologize to our community, especially those who shop here regularly, because my actions don't reflect the values we should hold." A slight tremor entered his voice, but he forced himself to continue. "I am currently completing a sensitivity training program, and I promise to do better. I hope you'll give me a chance to show I've learned from this. Thank you." He concluded with a shaky sigh. Bradley nodded at the intern, who stopped the recording. Silence followed. Linda wore an encouraging smile. "Well said, Russell. We'll post this on our social media, and hopefully people will see that you were sincere." Russell nodded, relief mixing with lingering anxiety. He could only hope that Barbara, if she ever saw it, would feel his apology was genuine. He had taken a public step toward redemption. Time would tell if the public and his own conscience would let him move on. A live interview. At 1:50 p.m., Barbara and Ethan arrived at the WGRO TV station, an unassuming building tucked between a pizzeria and an insurance office. Evelyn Turner greeted them in the small lobby, offering warm smiles and ushering them through a corridor lined with framed photos of past anchors and local celebrities. Evelyn led them into a cozy waiting area outside a pair of studio doors. "We'll have you go on around 2:10, she explained. "It'll be live, but nothing too intense. Just a friendly chat. Our host, Carlos Mendez, is very understanding." Barbara sat down, smoothing her skirt nervously. Ethan bounced his knees, the jitters showing through his normally calm demeanor. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "It'll be okay. We'll just share our story." A moment later, a producer in a headset beckoned them into the studio. It was smaller than Barbara expected, with bright lights, a couple of cameras on rolling stands, and a cozy set arranged with chairs and a coffee table. Soft music played overhead. A tall, charismatic man, Carlos, stepped forward. "Mrs. Sullivan, Ethan, welcome," he said, shaking their hands. "I am Carlos. Don't worry about the lights, just pretend you're chatting in your living room." They settled onto a small love seat, microphones clipped to their collars. Carlos sat facing them, a stack of note cards in hand. The producer counted down and the cameras went live. Barbara's heart pounded, but she forced a polite smile as Carlos introduced them. "Today we have a very special story about kindness, resilience, and the unexpected ways our community can come together. Please welcome Barbara Sullivan and her grandson Ethan." He turned to Barbara. "Thank you both for joining us." Barbara offered a polite nod. "Thank you for having us." Carlos leaned in, voice empathetic. "Barbara, could you share what happened that day at the grocery store? For those who might not know." She inhaled, steadying herself. "I was buying groceries with Ethan. I only had coins to pay and I was short on money. The cashier became impatient and I felt humiliated. But then Michael Jordan stepped in and paid for our groceries, including a small bag of candy for Ethan." Carlos's eyebrows rose with genuine curiosity. It must have been shocking to see Michael Jordan in that situation. Barbara let out a soft laugh. It was surreal. He was so calm and kind. "I didn't realize who he was at first, just that he was defending us." Carlos smiled, nodding. "And Ethan, how did you feel in that moment?" Ethan twisted his fingers, glancing at his grandmother. "I was scared because people were staring at us. But when Mr. Jordan helped, I was happy. He made us feel safe." Carlos paused, letting the weight of that statement settle in the air. "That is beautiful. Since then, how has your life changed?" Barbara cleared her throat. "Well, quite a bit. The story went viral. Reporters contacted us. A lot of people reached out with kind words or offers to help. The Champions Foundation invited us to a meeting. And now they're offering tutoring and other programs for Ethan. It is more than I ever imagined." Carlos leaned forward. "That's wonderful. How do you feel about all this attention? Has it been overwhelming?" She admitted, "Yes, at times I am grateful, but it can be scary. I never wanted to be in the spotlight. However, if sharing our experience encourages others to be kinder, then maybe it is worth it." Carlos glanced at Ethan. "Young man, do you have any message for people watching?" Ethan blinked, then smiled shyly. "Just be nice to everyone. You never know what someone is going through." Carlos laughed warmly. "Wise words, Ethan. And Barbara, any final thoughts?" Barbara folded her hands in her lap. "I just want to thank Mr. Jordan, the Champions Foundation, and everyone who's reached out. And I hope people remember that even small acts of kindness can change a life." Carlos nodded with respect. "Thank you both for being here. Your story reminds us that a bit of compassion can go a long way." The producer signaled the end of the segment, and the show cut to a commercial break. Cameras powered down. The bright lights dimmed, and a wave of relief washed over Barbara. She turned to Ethan, noticing a grin spread across his face. "That wasn't so bad," he whispered, and she chuckled in agreement. Evelyn hurried over, beaming. "That was perfect. Thank you so much. I'll make sure you get a copy of the recording. And if you need anything in the future, please reach out." Barbara thanked her, feeling an odd mix of exhilaration and exhaustion. As she and Ethan exited the station, she hoped their words might have touched even one viewer's heart. Already, she felt her phone buzzing in her purse, no doubt friends or acquaintances who had seen the live broadcast. A chance encounter. After the interview, Barbara decided to indulge Ethan in a small celebratory treat at a nearby cafe. They slipped into a booth by the window, ordering hot chocolate for Ethan and a coffee for Barbara. She sighed contentedly, letting the warm air and sweet aroma soothe her nerves. Midway through their drinks, the cafe door jingled, and in walked a tall, slender figure in a baseball cap and sunglasses. Barbara almost choked on her coffee when she realized it was Michael Jordan, presumably doing his best to remain low-key. He glanced around, perhaps checking for crowds or paparazzi. Ethan, eyes wide, tugged at his grandmother's sleeve. "Grandma, it's a—" She nodded, placing a finger to her lips. They watched as Jordan approached the counter. He hadn't noticed them, focused on ordering coffee. Barbara hesitated, unsure whether to interrupt his moment of privacy. After all he'd done, she didn't want to swarm him in public. However, as he stepped away from the counter, cup in hand, he spotted them. Recognition lit his features, and he smiled. Without hesitation, he made his way over to their booth, sliding off his sunglasses. "Barbara, Ethan," he greeted, voice warm. "I didn't expect to see you here." Barbara's cheeks flushed. "We, had a little TV interview nearby. We were celebrating with some hot chocolate." Jordan chuckled softly. "I caught part of it on a TV at the station." "You did great," spoke from the heart. Ethan beamed. "Thank you for everything, Mr. Jordan." Jordan patted the boy's shoulder. "I'm glad you two are doing well. How's the Champions Foundation treating you?" Barbara felt a swell of emotion. "They've been wonderful. I can't thank you enough for connecting us." Jordan waved it off. "It's all them, really. I just nudged, so. How about you two settling into this fame, all right?" His eyes sparkled with a hint of playfulness. Barbara managed a wry smile. "I am still not sure how I feel about it. But if it means Ethan gets more opportunities, I can handle a few interviews." Jordan nodded, respect in his gaze. "You're a strong lady, Barbara. Let me know if you need anything else." He glanced at Ethan. "And keep me posted on the puzzle club. Maybe I can drop by and see your skills sometime." Ethan's jaw dropped in excitement. "Really, that would be so cool." Jordan smiled. "We'll make it happen." He checked his watch. "I have to head back for another appointment. Great seeing you both. Take care." With a friendly wave, he slipped out the door, leaving Barbara and Ethan in a swirl of gratitude. For a moment, they just stared at each other, neither quite believing their fortune. Finally, Ethan let out a small laugh. "We must be the luckiest people in Maple Grove." Barbara tousled his hair. "Maybe we are, but let's not forget. It all started with that bag of candy you love so much." He giggled, and they finished their drinks, hearts lighter than they'd been in a long time. Hope blossoming. By the end of the day, Barbara felt both exhausted and invigorated. Returning to their apartment, she was met with a stack of mail, most of it from well-wishers who had seen her story. Among the envelopes, one stood out a slim, official-looking packet with a Champions Foundation logo in the corner. Inside, she found a neatly printed certificate for Ethan's acceptance into the Academic Explorers Club, along with a schedule of upcoming events. One flyer detailed a monthly puzzle competition for kids. Another described a family day where parents or guardians could join workshops to learn about supporting their children's education. Barbara's eyes brimmed with tears at the thought that Ethan would finally have the kind of stimulating environment that played to his strengths. She heard him in the living room, humming a tune he'd picked up somewhere. With a proud smile, she tucked the papers back into the envelope. They had a bright future waiting for them, no matter how unexpected the path had been. Her phone buzzed again, showing a number she didn't recognize. She answered cautiously. "Hello?" A gentle male voice responded, "Mrs. Sullivan. This is Pastor Allen from the Maple Grove Community Church. A few of our parishioners saw your interview and reached out, wanting to help if you needed anything. Clothes, rides, tutoring volunteers, that sort of thing." Barbara's heart filled yet again with amazement. She thanked Pastor Allen, explaining the foundation's involvement, but expressing gratitude for the church's concern. They exchanged kind words before hanging up, leaving her to marvel at how quickly a simple act of kindness could grow into a community-wide embrace. Evening reflections. That night, Barbara tucked Ethan into bed. He looked up at her, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Grandma, do you think everything will keep getting better?" he asked. She smoothed the covers, choosing her words carefully. "Life always has ups and downs, sweetheart, but I believe we have good people on our side. And as long as we keep trying our best, I think we'll be okay." He nodded, yawning. "I'm excited about the puzzle club. Do you think Mr. Jordan will really come watch?" Barbara laughed softly. You never know with him. He might surprise us. Cool, Ethan murmured, eyes drifting shut. Barbara gently kissed his forehead and switched off the lamp. In the dim glow of the hallway light, she saw the faint smile on his face as he dozed off. That small scene, a safe child asleep under a warm quilt, spoke volumes about the journey they'd taken. She made her way to the kitchen table, where she often found herself late at night, mulling over the day's events. In the past, she would have pored over grocery receipts and coins, worrying about how to make ends meet. But tonight, she sifted through envelopes of encouragement, information on after-school programs, and the budding sense that hope was more than just a word. The memory of the live interview flickered in her mind, Carlos's respectful questions, Ethan's shy wisdom. If even one person out there saw it and decided to be kinder to a stranger, or to offer help instead of scorn, she would consider it a success. She thought of Russell, too, praying his public apology would lead him to a more compassionate path. A tinge of guilt surfaced, recalling how she once feared a spotlight on her finances and personal life. Now she understood sometimes letting people in was the only way to build true community. Accepting help wasn't a sign of weakness, but an affirmation that no one should have to go it alone. Gathering the letters and flyers into a neat stack, Barbara smiled to herself. She felt the hush of the evening settling over Maple Grove. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she knew she wouldn't have faced them alone. Whether it was Russell trying to redeem himself, the Champions Foundation offering fresh opportunities, or Michael Jordan quietly watching their progress from afar, she and Ethan had friends, resources, and a story that wouldn't soon be forgotten. Finally, she stepped into the living room where Ethan slept. She gazed at him, feeling the strength of her promise to her late daughter burning bright in her chest. This was for him, for his future. With a soft whisper of, "Good night, Ethan," Barbara retreated to her own small bedroom, a heart full of gratitude and a mind brimming with possibilities. A quiet morning, a growing buzz. Barbara Sullivan woke to the pale glow of dawn spilling through her curtained window. For once, her heart felt oddly light. No throbbing anxiety about overdue bills or which items to forego at the grocery store. She rose and tiptoed into the living room, smiling at the sight of her grandson, Ethan, sprawled out on the pull-out couch. His puzzle pieces from the night before lay neatly in a box on the coffee table, a testament to his meticulous nature. Today marked the official start of Ethan's involvement with the Champions Foundation's Academic Explorers Club. After weeks of preparing, signing forms, and scheduling sessions, it was finally happening. He would attend his first workshop, a robotics-themed event designed to spark kids' curiosity. Barbara could hardly believe how swiftly their lives had transformed since that fateful day at Greenfield Market. Her heart brimmed with gratitude for the Foundation's generosity and for the new circle of people who seemed to genuinely care about their well-being. Kettle in hand, she set water to boil. She thought of the phone call she'd received the day before. A journalist from a national morning show was now interested in Barbara and Ethan's journey. The reporter had seen the local WGRO segment and wanted an exclusive. Barbara, still overwhelmed by local fame, had politely declined for now. Part of her worried about too much exposure for Ethan's sake. The last thing she wanted was to turn their personal struggles into a spectacle. Ethan stirred, peering up at her with sleepy eyes. "Morning, Grandma," he mumbled, then grinned as he remembered the day's plan. "Robotics Club starts today." He tumbled off the couch, immediately scanning the room for his shoes. Barbara chuckled. "Slow down, sweetheart. We'll have breakfast first." She noted his contagious enthusiasm, a stark contrast to the shy, uncertain boy he had been just a few weeks prior. It felt good, like a bud finally blossoming into a bright flower. Russell returned to work. While Barbara and Ethan prepared for their day, Russell was preparing for his. Today marked the end of his 2-week suspension from Greenfield Market. Dressed in a crisp new shirt he'd purchased from a thrift store, he took a steadying breath before heading out. In his pocket was a small index card listing phrases he'd memorized. "Good morning. Sir, how can I help you, ma'am?" Gentle reminders of the more courteous approach he was determined to maintain. The bus ride to the store felt surreal the last time he'd been there. He'd left in disgrace, uncertain about whether he'd even have a job to come back to. But during his suspension, he defilmed a public apology video, completed the required sensitivity training, and written an open letter to the manager and staff, promising to do better. He hoped it was enough. He arrived 10 minutes early, stepping into the fluorescent-lit interior. The manager, Bradley Monroe, was waiting near the front. Bradley nodded in greeting. "Morning, Russell. Let us talk in my office for a minute." Russell followed him, bracing for another lecture or final instructions. Instead, Bradley offered a measured smile. "You've done what corporate asked. The apology video got decent reception online. Some people remain upset, but others appreciated the effort. For now, you will keep the cashier position, but we'll have an extra manager on the floor to monitor overall service." "Understood." Relief washed over Russell. "Yes, sir, I understand." Bradley hesitated, then added, "Look, you made a big mistake, but you've owned it. Don T make me regret giving you a second chance. If you show progress, we'll move forward." He extended a hand. Russell shook it, voice thick. "Thank you. I wanted to let you down." As he stepped onto the store floor, he caught a few sideways glances from coworkers. Some nodded politely. Others looked unsure. He squared his shoulders and approached his old checkout lane. A new sign overhead read, "We were here to help, kindness matters." The irony wasn't lost on him. Taking a deep breath, he logged into the register, determined to prove his sincerity with every customer he served. First day at the club. Meanwhile, Barbara and Ethan arrived at the bustling community center, now abuzz with parents dropping off children for various programs. A large banner welcomed them Champions Foundation Academic Explorers Launch Day. Inside, they found a bright, multi-purpose room filled with tables, computers, and half-assembled robotics kits. Jennifer and Maurice, the friendly staffers from previous meetings, hurried around, greeting families and helping kids get situated. When they saw Ethan and Barbara, both broke into welcoming smiles. "There he is," Jennifer exclaimed, guiding Ethan to a table where a small group of children huddled over a robot arm. "Ethan, you'll be working with these guys." They were learning about mechanical joints and simple coding commands. Barbara watched as Ethan introduced himself shyly, then quickly joined the conversation about servo motors and grippers. The other kids seemed equally excited, her chest filled with pride. Not so long ago, a gathering like this would have been out of reach financially and logistically. Now it was part of their new normal. Maurice approached, handing Barbara a small folder. "These are some resources about advanced puzzle competitions. I remember you mentioning Ethan's love for problem solving. There's a regional contest in a month's time. He could sign up if he's interested." Barbara's eyes glowed. "Thank you. I'm sure he'll jump at the chance." Maurice nodded, scanning the room. "By the way, keep an eye out later. We might have a special visitor. Nothing confirmed, but you never know." He winked, and Barbara suspected he meant Michael Jordan. She smiled, thinking back to their brief but heartfelt meeting at the cafe. No matter how famous he seemed genuinely invested in their well-being. For the next hour, Ethan remained engrossed in hands-on robotics tasks, tinkering with wires and small servos. Occasionally he'd glance up at Barbara, flashing a grin that made her heart warm. Barbara took a seat at the back of the room, content to watch him flourish in this environment. A sudden phone call. Halfway through the session, Barbara's phone vibrated in her purse. She stepped into the hallway to answer. "Hello?" A hesitant male voice responded. "Mrs. Sullivan, it is Russell." Barbara's heart skipped. They'd exchanged numbers briefly when he first brought flowers to apologize, so she wasn't entirely surprised. "Oh, hello, Russell, how are you?" She heard him exhale. "I am back at Greenfield Market. I wanted to say thank you again, if it weren't for your forgiveness. I don't think I'd have this job right now. Everyone still looks at me kind of weird, but I am determined to do better." Barbara recalled the raw sincerity in his eyes when he'd visited her apartment. "I am glad you were back. You sound better." "I am," he replied. Also I was thinking, maybe sometime I could do something positive like a small fundraiser or donation drive for families who might be in your situation. Kind of a way to pay it forward, you know." Barbara's chest constricted. She never imagined the man who had once humiliated her would now be asking how to help others. "That sounds wonderful, Russell. Let me know if I can help in any way." They exchanged a few more pleasantries before hanging up. Barbara slipped the phone back into her purse, feeling a profound sense of relief. Russell's redemption was more than just words. He was actively seeking ways to channel his lesson into good. She headed back to the workshop, mind alight with possibilities. A flourishing partnership. By the time Ethan finished the robotics session, he was practically bouncing with excitement. The group had successfully programmed the robot arm to move small blocks from one place to another, simple, but an achievement that left every child brimming with pride. He ran over to Barbara, eyes shining. "Grandma, did you see?" "It worked." She laughed. "Yes, I saw everything. I'm so proud of you." Jennifer approached, offering Ethan a certificate for completing the day's workshop. "We'd love to have you in the next sessions too," she said. "We'll be rotating through topics: coding, creative problem solving, even a puzzle building day that might be right up your alley." Barbara tucked the certificate into her bag. "Thank you. We'll definitely be back." Before they could leave, Maurice waved them over to where he was talking to a tall figure in a black jacket. Sure enough, it was Michael Jordan, casually dressed but still commanding the room's attention. He beckoned them closer. "Ethan," Barbara Jordan greeted, grinning at the sight of Ethan's wide eyes. "I heard there was a robotics workshop today. How'd it go?" Ethan gushed, explaining their little project in an excited tumble of words. Jordan listened attentively, nodding at all the right moments. "Sounds like you've got some real engineering talent," he praised, then turned to Barbara. "And how about you, Barbara? How are things?" She smiled warmly. "Better than I ever hoped." "Ethan's thriving, and I'm finally breathing easier." Jordan's eyes reflected genuine happiness. "I'm glad. Keep me posted on that puzzle contest, okay? Maybe I can drop by, cheer him on." Ethan practically levitated at the suggestion, while Barbara thanked Jordan once more. Their conversation was cut short as Jordan was pulled aside by staffers who wanted a quick photo. He offered them an apologetic grin, and Barbara gave a reassuring nod before guiding Ethan toward the exit. Outside, the crisp air felt like a promise of fresh starts. Ethan clutched his new certificate, babbling about the next workshop. Barbara realized, with a pang, how close Ethan's birthday was, just 2 weeks away. This year, they had enough financial stability to consider something special. Perhaps a small party at the community center with some of his new friends, or even a puzzle-themed celebration. She made a mental note to talk to the Champions Foundation about possibly reserving a small room. Plans in motion. Later that afternoon, at their apartment, Barbara spread out a few flyers and puzzle contest pamphlets on the kitchen table. Ethan hovered behind her, eagerly pointing out the date for the upcoming regional competition. "Grandma, can we sign up?" She glanced at the registration fee, a modest amount that once would have been difficult for them to spare. Now, thanks to the small monthly allowance from the foundation, it was within reach. She smiled. "Absolutely, sweetheart." That settled, she also jotted down a few ideas for Ethan's birthday. Maybe just a simple gathering with a puzzle or robotics theme, something he'd love. No need to go overboard. She was still a practical woman at heart. But a slice of cake and some decorations felt well within reason. Ethan excused himself to rummage through his puzzle collection, searching for a new challenge. Barbara reflected on how joyous he seemed, no longer weighed down by the specter of scarcity. Quietly, she murmured a thank you to whichever guardian angels had guided them to this new chapter. Russell's initiative. A week passed in relative calm. Barbara and Ethan continued visiting the Foundation's programs, while Russell settled into a more measured routine at Greenfield Market, greeting each customer with care. True to his word, Russell began organizing a modest charity drive at the store, hoping to help other families who found themselves short on funds for groceries. With Bradley Monroe's grudging blessing, Russell placed a small donation box at the entrance, labeled Neighbors Helping Neighbors, a fund for families in need. Every day, he emptied the contributions into a secure location, planning to eventually forward it to a local food bank or to families recommended by the Champions Foundation. One late afternoon, he mustered the nerve to call Barbara again. "Mrs. Sullivan, I am setting up a small event at the store, a weekend kindness drive. We'll have discounted items for shoppers, and we're re-asking people to donate a small portion of their savings. I was wondering if you'd come by and say a few words. You know, share your story so folks understand who they were helping." Barbara's initial reaction was to recoil from more public exposure. Yet she recognized how crucial a personal connection could be in motivating donations. "Let me think about it," she replied gently. "I'll call you back tomorrow." That evening, she deliberated with Ethan. "What do you think, sweetheart? Should we help Russell? Ethan shrugged, a soft smile playing on his lips. He's trying to do good things now. I think it is nice if we help him. Touched by her grandson's forgiving spirit, Barbara decided to accept Russell's invitation. If their story could continue to inspire kindness, it was worth stepping into the spotlight one more time. The kindness drive. The following Saturday arrived bright and sunny. Barbara and Ethan walked to Greenfield Market, the same store where their story had begun. Outside, a colorful banner read, "Kindness Drive, everyone deserves a helping hand." Tables were set up with baked goods, discount produce, and even a raffle for small prizes. A modest crowd milled about, enjoying the cheerful atmosphere. Russell stood near the entrance, wearing an apron and a slightly anxious expression. He spotted Barbara and Ethan and hurried over. "You came," he exclaimed, relief evident in his voice. Barbara smiled, noticing how neatly he had tidied the store entrance. "Of course, this looks wonderful." He guided them to a small makeshift stage, really just a raised platform near the produce aisle. A microphone stood to one side. "We're doing short announcements every hour or so," Russell explained. "If you were comfortable, you could just say a few words, thank people for donating, and maybe tell them how a little help can change someone's life." Barbara nodded, nerves fluttering in her stomach. She glanced at Ethan, who gave her an encouraging nod, taking a calming breath. She stepped onto the platform when Russell signaled. The mic squealed slightly, drawing the attention of shoppers. "Hello, everyone," she began, voice shaky but earnest. "I am Barbara Sullivan, and this is my grandson Ethan. A little while ago, I was in this very store struggling to pay for groceries, but an act of kindness changed our lives, reminding me that we never truly alone if we were willing to reach out and help each other." She paused, scanning the small crowd. Some recognized her from local news segments, others listened with polite curiosity. "I can't thank the community enough for the support we've received from Michael Jordan's generosity to the Champions Foundation's programs. And now I see the kindness is spreading. You are all here today, donating to help neighbors in need. Thank you for showing me that compassion can be contagious." Her heart pounded as she stepped back, relinquishing the mic. A smattering of applause broke out and Russell beamed. Ethan tugged at her sleeve, smiling. "You did great, Grandma." For the next hour, they mingled with shoppers. Many greeted Barbara warmly, some quietly slipping envelopes of donations into the box. Russell manned a table offering discounted staple items, rice, pasta, canned vegetables, encouraging people to donate part of their savings. The store manager, Bradley, hovered in the background, nodding occasionally in approval. Partway through, a hush fell as a new figure entered. Michael Jordan, once again incognito in a casual jacket and cap. Word traveled fast, and a small group of shoppers paused, whispering. Jordan raised a hand in friendly greeting, heading straight toward Barbara and Ethan. "You two again?" he teased, smiling broadly. Then he turned to Russell, who looked simultaneously thrilled and terrified. "I heard about this drive. Sounds like a big step in the right direction." Russell flushed. It is. I wanted to do something meaningful," he stammered. "I am grateful to Barbara for everything." Jordan nodded, placing a few bills in the donation box. "You're doing great work, Russell. Keep it up." He patted the cashier's shoulder, then turned to the small crowd, speaking in a clear, calm tone. "Every community has families who could use a hand. We've seen how a single act of kindness can snowball into something incredible. I am proud of everyone here for making Maple Grove a little brighter." Applause rippled through the store, and more people approached the donation box. The moment felt surreal to Barbara, standing in the same aisle where she once counted coins in shame, now surrounded by generosity and goodwill. The puzzle contest. 2 weeks later. Excitement filled the air as Barbara and Ethan stepped off a bus in a neighboring town. Today was the regional puzzle competition, a highlight Ethan had been dreaming of. Held in a spacious community hall, rows of tables were lined with puzzle boards, timers, and young participants buzzing with nervous energy. Ethan's face glowed with anticipation. "Grandma, I'm a little scared," he admitted, clutching her hand. She squeezed back gently. "It's okay to be nervous, sweetheart. Just focus on having fun. Do your best." They checked in at the registration desk, where Ethan was handed a competitor badge. As they found his assigned table, Barbara noticed other parents offering last-minute pep talks. Some kids arranged piles of puzzle pieces, while others chattered about strategies. Ethan exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders like an athlete before a big game. Amid the hustle, Barbara spotted Jennifer and Maurice from the Champions Foundation standing near a corner, cheering on several children they had sponsored. They waved wildly at Ethan, mouthing good luck. He grinned back, heartened by their support. Moments later, a loudspeaker crackled to life. "Participants, please take your seats. We will begin the first round in 2 minutes. Good luck to all." Barbara found a seat in the gallery, nerves pinging in her stomach on Ethan's behalf. She caught sight of a tall figure slipping in discreetly, Michael Jordan. Of course, he tipped his cap at her, and she inclined her head in gratitude. She had no clue how he found the time for all these surprise visits, but she was grateful beyond words. The contest began, a quiet hush settling over the hall as each competitor bent over their puzzle. Barbara watched Ethan's fingers move with surety, sorting pieces by color and shape. Periodically, he glanced at the timer, then back at his puzzle, eyes alight with focus. It was a beautiful thing to witness a child lost in the pure joy of tackling a challenge that suited him. 30 minutes in, Barbara could see Ethan's puzzle taking form a scenic mountain landscape. Across the aisle, some children raced ahead, while others seemed stuck. Ethan kept a steady pace, never panicking, just methodically finding each piece's rightful spot. Finally, a judge called out, "Time." Ethan placed the last piece with a triumphant grin. As the room erupted in scattered applause, Barbara clapped until her palms tingled. A flurry of judges converged on each table, checking completeness and time records. After a brief intermission, the loudspeaker announced the winners of each category. Barbara's heart hammered, her fingers crossed. In the under-12 division, first place goes to Ethan Sullivan. Ethan froze, eyes wide. Barbara leapt to her feet, tears pricking her eyes. Applause thundered, and Michael Jordan joined in, whistling softly in admiration. Jennifer and Maurice cheered from their corner, fists pumping the air. A stunned Ethan shuffled to the front to accept a small trophy and a certificate. The contest host asked if he wanted to say anything. He swallowed hard, glancing at the crowd. "Just thank you. This was awesome." Barbara's heart soared. She reflected on the countless nights Ethan had spent alone with his puzzles, forging a quiet resilience in the face of loss and hardship. This moment, shining with pride and promise, felt like a reward for both of them. A birthday surprise. 1 week later, on a crisp Saturday morning, Barbara and Ethan ventured to the community center for what Ethan believed was just another robotics session. But when they stepped inside, the lobby was festooned with balloons and a large banner reading, "Happy 9th birthday, Ethan." A small chorus of voices cried out, "Surprise!" Ethan gasped, looking around in wonder. Jennifer, Maurice, Russell, and a handful of new friends from the foundation and puzzle club stood grinning. A modest table held a cake topped with puzzle piece decorations. The entire scene brimmed with warmth. Tears stung Barbara's eyes as she realized how many people had contributed. Russell wore a shy smile, holding a wrapped box. Even Bradley Monroe, the store manager, hovered near the back with a grin. The highlight was Michael Jordan quietly slipping in, though he kept a respectful distance from the main fuss. Barbara caught his eye, mouthing a thank you, and he nodded. They gathered around Ethan, singing a slightly off-key but heartfelt rendition of Happy Birthday. The boy's cheeks flushed crimson, but he was beaming so brightly, Barbara feared he might burst from joy. He blew out the candles, everyone cheering. Russell stepped forward, extending his gift. "This is for you, kiddo," he said softly. "It's a new puzzle. I did some research to find something extra tricky." Ethan unwrapped it with glee, revealing a 1,500-piece puzzle of a starry sky. He let out a delighted squeal. "Thank you so much." He gave Russell an impulsive hug, which made the cashier's eyes glisten. One by one, well-wishers came by with small tokens, puzzle books, robotics kits, handmade cards. Barbara found herself repeatedly blinking back tears. This simple party, so full of genuine affection, might have been unimaginable a month ago. Yet here they were, surrounded by friends who'd become like family. When the sugar-fueled excitement mellowed, Michael Jordan approached Ethan, handing him a small envelope. "Open that later," he advised gently, ruffling the boy's hair. "Just a little something to keep you dreaming big." Barbara smiled, curiosity piqued. As Jordan said his farewells, Ethan hugged him fiercely around the waist. "Thanks for everything, Mr. Jordan," the boy murmured. Jordan gently patted his back, then slipped away with characteristic grace. The final chapter. That evening, back at their apartment, Barbara and Ethan carefully opened Jordan's envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a personal invitation to a future youth mentorship program, an opportunity for Ethan to meet engineers, athletes, and other mentors who could broaden his horizons. Barbara blinked, fighting back tears yet again. Michael Jordan's kindness had no bounds. With hearts overflowing, Barbara and Ethan settled at the kitchen table for a quiet moment of reflection. Over the last few weeks, they had seen the best of people: the store manager who offered second chances, the cashier who sought redemption, the foundation staff who nurtured untapped potential, and a world-famous athlete who used his influence to lift them up rather than seeking glory for himself. Ethan cleared a small space on the table and began working on the starry sky puzzle Russell had given him. Barbara sipped tea, content just to watch him piece together new constellations. Their apartment was still humble, their resources modest, but the intangible riches of friendship and community now overflowed. The phone buzzed once more, another message from a neighbor wanting to bring over some leftover party supplies. Barbara smiled, feeling more loved and supported than she ever had before. She glanced at Ethan, who paused his puzzle to flash her a grin. In that silent exchange, they acknowledged how far they'd come. Eventually, Ethan placed a puzzle piece into its spot with a soft click, then looked up. "Grandma," he said gently, "everything's different now, isn't it?" She reached out, brushed hair from his forehead. "Yes, sweetheart, it truly is." He leaned over, resting his head against her arm. "I'm glad," he whispered, eyes shining with contentment. Barbara pressed a kiss to his temple. "Me too, Ethan, me too." They returned to the puzzle side by side, forging a new future piece by careful piece. Their story, once marked by coins counted in desperation, had blossomed into a tale of redemption, compassion, and fresh beginnings. And though life would always have its challenges, they had learned that a single spark of kindness could ignite a flame bright enough to guide them all the way home.